What I have with me here today is a direct competitor, you could say, to the Redmi Note 7. So the Meizu Note 9 is a very similar phone spec-wise when you take a look at it. So we have a 20 megapixel front-facing selfie cam, a 48 megapixel sensor on the rear, which is the exact same sensor as the Redmi Note 7, and that being the Samsung GM1. And it also has a secondary 5 megapixel camera there too. Now it has a teardrop notch display on this one. So it's 6.2 inches in IPS panel with a resolution of 2244 by 1080. And the interesting part, and where it does really better the Redmi Note 7, is the chipset. So this is going to be the first phone I'm checking out that has the Qualcomm Snapdragon 675. So this should perform very similar to the Snapdragon 835, which is a couple of generations old flagship chipset. So it does pack a very reasonable amount of power in here. A 4000 milliamp hour battery. It has 18-watt charging, Type-C port, dual nano SIM, and yes, this is a global version, so global ROM with all your languages and LTE Band 20 support. So let's check it out.
Okay, so I'll start out with what we get first in the box. So you can see we've got some of the key specs that are listed on this transit screen protector. They are also now on the right of the screen for you if you want to check that out. So my version is the black color. It has the 4GB RAM and 64GB of storage. Here we have a SIM tray tool, as you can see, and it's got that Flying Me OS logo to it there. Now inside, we've just got some warranty cards, instruction manual, and whatnot. Here we have our Type-C USB cable in white, and our power supply. Now this power supply is an 18-watt quick charge 3 power supply. It's rather big, a little bit longer than your typical power supply. So the phone being a global version with the global ROM on here, we've got all those Android 9 languages you can think of there. Now up the top, we have a teardrop notch, and I can see that it does have a little bit of shadowing just below it. Just give you a close-up of it now so you can see what I mean. So just around where that is, and at the top, you see a little bit of like a shadow that's appearing around the top of the screen. You don't really see it on the sides. It just tends to be on the corners and around that water drop style notch. Up the very top, you will see we do have the slit at the top. That's where our earpiece is. And we do have an ambient light sensor, which you can see located right here. What is missing on this phone is no status LED. But I also wanted to point out that when you're looking at the screen straight on, that you don't really see that shadowing around there. You can see at the bottom that we do have still a little bit of a chin here and lip. Along the bottom of the phone, you will find a secondary microphone, the Type-C port loudspeaker, and a 3.5mm headphone jack, which is really good to have on here. It's great that they did not end up dropping this. On the right, volume up and down buttons and the power button. These, to me, feel like they're made out of metal. The same goes for the frame around the outside here, and then the little frame that goes around the screen. So this part around the screen here, which then mates with the rear housing, this, to me, feels like an outside metal frame, and you often find with some manufacturers they use plastic there, but Meizu hasn't. The SIM tray is located on the upper left-hand side, and it doesn't have a rubber gasket around or anything like that, so it's not with any IP rating. You wouldn't expect it, of course, at this price point. It takes 2 nano SIMs, and sadly no micro SD card support here, so 64GB, that's all you've got. Up the top you'll find just a secondary mic here, which is used for noise cancellation and in video. On the rear, we've got a fingerprint reader, dual-tone LED flash, the main camera, which is a 48 megapixel Samsung GM1 sensor, and then a auxiliary 5 megapixel sensor. Now the thickness of the phone is 8.6 millimeters. That's without the camera bump. With the camera bump, that brings it up then to 9.6. And down the bottom of the back here, you'll find Meizu's logo here, and it just states LTE mobile phone assembled in China, designed by Meizu. And here's the weight of the phone, so 168 grams. This is not bad at all, making it a relatively light phone. So the phone in hand, it feels good, easy access to those buttons on the right hand side, and the back of it is glass. So yes, of course, it is slippery, but overall I think the build is decent. It's not super high end, but for the price of this phone, I feel it is definitely adequate with the build they've gone with and the finish of it. There's no sharp edges. and no faults that I can see at all. So you can see at the moment I have full screen gesture mode enabled with the ROM, and I will quickly just go through it to show you that what kind of bloatware you can expect before I later show you with all my apps and games and everything installed. So we've got obviously Google's bloat in here. You can call it bloat, but I'd rather they give us the option to possibly just download and install whatever you want. Google Play Store, of course, is there, this being the global ROM. That's the whole kind of point of it, isn't it? And they have some pre-installed games. So this is our true bloat there. So they've got a couple of games on there like Asphalt Nitro and others that maybe you might like, but again, I don't think they should pre-install them. And Files Go, whatever that is. So our display at 6.2 inches with a resolution of 2244 by 1080 has a maximum brightness of just over 400 lux, which is okay. Certainly not the brightest screen that I have seen, but again, for the price point of this phone, that's actually okay. One thing that checks out really good here is the gamma. So gamma is spot on 2.2, which you often don't see. So overall, I think this is a nice screen, apart from that little bit of shadowing that I pointed out at the top and along where that water drop notch is. Besides that, it does look good. The touch response here is fine. So overall, a decent IPS panel that Meizu has selected for this phone. Now let's take a look at the face unlocking. So I've already set it up. I won't go through all of that with you, but I'll just tap it now and it's looking at my face. So you get the tick and then you need to swipe up and it unlocks. It works fine. The speed is fast, but I wish it would just go directly straight into the UI without having to swipe up. I haven't found the setting to be able to just go directly in there. Maybe it's in there, but at this stage I've looked around and I can't seem to find it. So fingerprint reader on the back here, it is quite quick. And I'll touch it, you can see, there we go, it unlocks. It takes only about a second and the accuracy seems to be good. I'd say it works about 90% of the time. It's not the best fingerprint reader I've come across, but it certainly isn't bad. And now just to run through a couple of things. So Fortnite, I know a lot of you younger guys in the comments are going to ask me, will it run Fortnite? It will once they finally add support for the Snapdragon 675, which does not seem to be supported at all here, which is a shame. So I cannot show that. Now here is the 4G speed, so it all depends on your carrier. So I was getting okay kind of speeds, LTE. It does support LTE band 20, which is a really good thing, this being a global version, of course. And it doesn't have Widevine level 1 security surge. So level 3 means you're stuck with Amazon Prime, Netflix, and standard definition, which is a real shame. Now, standard definition on a mobile screen at 6.2 inches is okay, but even so, I would really love them to update this to security level 1, so then we get at least HD. Now, I have a bit of a problem here with the wireless. There seems to be some sort of bug affecting 2G and 5G bands. So you can see here different spots around the apartment. This is the furthest away right here. Actually, this one right here, 141 megabits per second, was all going fine. And you can see then, even when I got really close to the router, the speed started to absolutely plummet. And I noticed that sometimes I was having this problem downloading PUBG, which is 1.8 gigabytes. It was taking absolutely forever. And this is the reason why. Because I started to connect at such super low speeds to my router. Now, no other phone is experiencing this problem. I tested out my Huawei P30 Pro. I tested out my Samsung Galaxy S9 Plus, my Mi 9. They were all good. They were connecting and getting around 200 and something megabits per second. So there's a definite bug here in the ROM with the wireless that they need to address, and hopefully they do that ASAP. Now, once I connected back up to it, the speeds went up again. So you have to disconnect, reconnect, and maybe even reboot the phone. So not good to see that at all. So there's once I rebooted. Actually, no, this is after disconnecting the wireless, connecting back up again. Speeds then went back to, well, almost normal. They were still a little slow there. And I am on the latest Flyme version. So to me, this is a bit of a beta global ROM, it seems. And they definitely have a few things to patch there. So here's the internal storage speed. So it does have eMMC 5.1 spec, and these speeds are perfectly fine here. So sequential read of almost 300, writes of over 200. That's fine. That's not going to cause any bottlenecks within the system. And it's understandable for the price of this phone, around 200 US, that they're not going to be using UFS 2.1 storage. And the not Geekbench, but Antutu score here. So this one comes out quite good considering on my Redmi Note 7 with the Snapdragon 660, I think I got about 128,000 or 130,000 here. So you see it is quite a bit of a boost here that we are getting. GPU scores, the CPU scores from the Cryo 460 faster cores there is definitely noticeable. So it is a performance boost. It will be better at gaming, and I will show you some gaming shortly, just after this. So I'll start out with PUBG. Now I have used that GFX tool to set the extreme 60 frames per second for our frame rate, and it's on HD, and I also set 1080p as well. Now you'll notice that we've got a little bit of a border here because of the notch. Now this is a software thing, and I can almost barely close this window because of the rounded edge right there. But anyway, let's see how the game performs. So even with the 1080p resolution, this is looking very playable, and to me it feels faster than the Redmi Note 7 if I had the exact same settings here. You can see scrolling around, that's relatively smooth. I can see a little bit of jerkiness, but I think it's more to do with the touch for some reason here. And just go in there and zoom in a little bit, look down the sights, and you can see that that's perfectly fine there. In fact, I'll move over to my crossbow where I have a scope on it, just to demonstrate too that you're not going to have any problems, I believe, aiming. As you can see, that moves around just fine. And I'll just do a little bit of a run forward here. You can see good looking graphics, it looks sharp, and that frame rate, the main thing of course, it's keeping up. So performance with PUBG, you're not going to have any problems, I don't think, at all. You can probably run this, of course, on a lower resolution. Run it in 960p would probably be a lot smoother. In fact, it would be. And then this title here, this is Shadowgun Legends. I've set it to the 60 frames per second setting, and on medium. I tried it on ultra high, and it was just a little bit laggy. And on high, it seemed okay, but a few stutters. So here, on medium, I think is the best setting for this particular mobile. And it still looks really good, this graphics. You will get the occasional little stutter, but overall, gaming performance does seem very good on the Snapdragon 675. Now let's take a look at the audio. So I first wanted to comment on the call quality, that it seems fine to me. The earpiece at the top, no problems, no real issues there. 3.5mm headphone jack quality is okay. It's not the best I've heard, but I think for the price of the phone that it's fine. Most people should be happy with it. The volume output from it could be a little bit higher. Now the loudspeaker, depending on the content you're watching. So right now YouTube here, I'll give you a sample of it, that the loudness is okay. Certainly with ringtones, it's fine. And in games, Shadowgun Legends is very loud, but here it could just definitely be a little bit louder. But I'll give you a sample now of that single loudspeaker on the bottom. Now, I wanted to briefly touch on the ROM performance. Is something that I always cover in my reviews here. So Flyme OS, I'm not a big fan of it. And we've got, okay, the drawer here, that's not an apps drawer. So you've got all your apps and your widgets all there at once. And I have noticed that when you are multitasking, for example, I've got a couple of games, or one game there running in the background, YouTube and a few other apps, that you will see their performance definitely does degrade a little bit once you start to multitask. And where it is very obvious to me, you can see right there, there's a couple of little stutters. This animation just doesn't seem to be as smooth as it could be, especially considering the chipset. So if you go into Google Play Store and then you decide to, okay, I'm going to go along and start to load up a whole bunch of different apps at the same time while you're installing, that's when you see some noticeable lag in the UI. So optimization is needed, because if I was then to swap over to Nova Launcher, which I have right here now, go over to our apps drawer, you see the performance here just seems to be so much better to me. So it could be the fact that we have maybe a bit of a beta ROM on here at the moment, and Meizu definitely, as far as I can tell, needs to optimize this ROM and especially focus on that wireless issue that I talked about earlier on. And this is the stock application for our camera. So we've got portrait mode, which takes the bokeh blurred background photos. Video mode up to 4K without any electronic image stabilization. There's no electronic image stabilization, as you'll see from my samples, on the front-facing camera either. Now right here under more, we have the super night. So this is their night shot mode, which as you'll see from the samples, is not really that good. It does make a bit of a difference. I think it's more or less increasing the exposure, but I don't think it seems to be stitching together various different photos, or at least they need to tweak the software, Meizu. Now, Pro mode here as well. we have just a few controls here. So you got shutter rate, ISO, exposure, your focus, and the white balance. And here's where you'll find the option to take a photo in 48 megapixels. So enabling that, it says open 48 megapixels. And when I compared it side by side with the 12 megapixel default shot, it's actually really no better. In fact, it has a little bit more noise, depending maybe on some circumstances. In some situations, it may take a slightly sharper image, well, a little bit more detail, but overall, I wouldn't really ever use the 48 megapixel mode because it's actually interpolated software and not a true 48 megapixels.
You will notice that the image lacks any optical or electronic image stabilization, which is a shame. And that's also in 1080p. In fact, none of the video that I've recorded on this has any form of stabilization, including the front-facing camera. And you'll notice it definitely when I start to walk now. So let's have a look at the focus. I put my hand up, and you can see focus does a reasonable job. It's not as fast as the dual pixel phase detection autofocus. It's just phase detection autofocus. Not a brilliant day here, a little bit overcast. But overall, they need to add some form of stabilization. Electronic, of course, is all they can do to this phone. So video quality, at least then, can be actually usable. And if you're wondering, 1080p video also lacks electronic image stabilization. So Meizu need to get their act together. And this is the front-facing camera, so the audio when you shoot 1080p for some reason then becomes stereo again without that horrible, terrible bit rate, but overall, especially in 4K video, the audio is just awful. So here you can see the quality is okay, it's not too bad, but the problem and the issue again, of course, is the lack of any electronic image stabilization. Alright, so there we go. It has a nice screen on it, brightness about 400 lux, a good gamma. And overall, I feel for the price of this phone, you're getting a good package in terms of hardware, definitely that's there. Performance is faster than the Snapdragon 660, as we can clearly see. It's getting Antutu scores of about 180,000, and the 660 gets about 130,000 maximum really scores you can get from there. So performance-wise, especially if you're gaming, this is perhaps one to look at in the future, because at the moment there are some performance issues. There's some optimization that is definitely needed to me with the ROM, that if you start to multitask, and not even heavy multitasking, you just download something in Play Store, get out of it, load up, say, Twitter, and you notice then that, hang on, the scrolling performance has a bit of stutter to it, a little bit of lag, and then there's that problem with the wireless performance that it will drop off at times. Sometimes it's perfectly fine, but then out of the blue, for no apparent reason, it will start to really drop down those speeds. And if you disconnect and reconnect, then the wireless will get back up to its normal kind of speeds that you would expect. So there's definitely a few bugs in this ROM. It seems to be a global beta. So once Meizu can improve on that, improve their performance, then I feel we're going to have a really good phone. Now, the other thing is too, okay, you could run Nova Launcher, which runs fine. You can set it as the home launcher as well. They're not blocking us off from doing that. So that if you're not happy with Flyme OS, I don't particularly like it myself that much either, then run Nova Launcher. The other thing too to point out with the cameras, so front-facing camera, yeah, I mean, it can take an okay photo. The rear camera as well can take good daylight photos. Low light performance doesn't seem that great. Even using their night mode, it does make a difference, as you can see from my sample that I showed you with a normal auto photo, and then with the night mode, that you can see it's a little bit brighter, but it's still got a lot of noise, it's lacking detail, and it's certainly not the best that I have seen there. Now, I'm not too sure whether Google Camera might be able to run on this. If you can find a port that works, then of course then you'll be able to take a lot better photos, because I know you can get Google Camera with the Redmi Note 7 for night sight photos, and we should be able to do it on this, I believe. But we'll have to test that out and see if it's going to support that at all. So overall, I think it's a decent phone, but the software needs fixes, it needs optimization, improvement. But the Snapdragon 675, my first time with this chipset, and I do like it. Definitely in gaming, you see the difference, you can feel it, it's smoother, it's a lot faster than the Snapdragon 660, or even the 672. That's in the Samsung Galaxy Tab S5 that I've just, S5e that I just reviewed as well. And I can definitely see and notice the improvement there. So thank you so much for watching this review. Please do like and subscribe for more videos from me. And I do hope to catch you back in the next one. Bye for now.